I hope you give her
more missiles, more dead. This time a convoy of ambulances.
Please send the bill to me, yeah?
I might well do that, George, yes.
Okay.
There's also been some very nasty ones I'm not reading out as well, but I'm sure you're used to that.
That's okay, as long as you keep them for me so I can pass them on to Scotland Yard if they're threatening violence.
No, they're mostly spelt wrong, but that's okay.
Well, it's the equivalent of green ink, you know. You can't do green ink on emails, but you can still recognize a green ink writer.
Now, the interesting thing, some people send some really nasty ones, they forget to delete their phone number from the top.
It's always helpful. The police are always happy to receive any of these hate mail. You know, I get a lot of hate mail, James, threatening me with death and all sorts of trials and tribulations. Sodomy, mainly. They're particularly big on sodomy, the people who write hate mail to me. But whenever there's a threat of violence involved, I always give it to the House of Commons Police, and it ends up in Scotland Yard.
There's a book in that somewhere, George, I'm sure.
There is. I've got a file called Poison. I write on the top of a lot of this stuff just poison. That is, if there's no threat in it, but it's just poison, it goes in a very big filing cabinet, and one day I might publish it all.
I think that's a good idea. Right, let's crack on. Mike is in Warsaw. Mike, you're on the air through to George Galloway.
Oh, good evening. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Mike.
Yeah, I was listening to your review of the papers, but there's a paper yesterday, a Lebanese paper, the Daily Al-Nahar, and it was published yesterday, and I've got translation. The Mufti of Tyre, who's a Shiite leader, a man called Sayyid Ali Al-Amin, said, and I quote, "The Shiite community in Lebanon authorized no one to declare war in its name," and he opposed the war. So I think that really just puts a bit more perspective on your view that the Hezbollah speak for Lebanon themselves.
Where did you get the translation, Mike? Was it from Memory, the Israeli website?
MemoryTV.org, yes.
Yeah, I know that site well, so I advise you to be a bit circumspect. But I'm full of admiration for a TalkSport listener on a Saturday night who is reading translations of an Arabic newspaper called An-Nahar, which only about 5,000 people read. It's remarkable how the circulation of newspapers can travel nowadays. I don't know this Mufti. I don't particularly care to, but you're fooling yourself if you don't think that Hezbollah has the support of the overwhelming majority of Lebanese people. That's all I can say. You're just fooling yourself.
Okay, let's go to Abdullah, who's in Berkshire. Abdullah, you're on the air through to George Galloway.
Hello?
Yes, hello, Abdullah.
Hello, George?
Yes, you're on the air on TalkSport.
Yeah, good man. You're a good man.
Thank you, my friend. What's your point of view?
Why do America have double standards? On one hand, they want peace between Israel and Lebanon, and on the other hand, they were sending their planes flying to Great Britain, refueling, and going over to Israel and Lebanon and bombing the women and children. Is that double standards or not?
Well, it's definitely double standards, but the good news is it hasn't fooled anybody. And there's an interesting angle on this, James. You'll remember that Jack Straw fell in love with Condoleezza Rice just before he got sacked.
And who could blame him?
Well, the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, very unwisely kissed Condoleezza in the middle of the war. And it's a picture that's being endlessly replayed here, and will probably do for his career what the love affair with Condoleezza Rice did for Jack Straw, or the kiss from George Bush did for Senator Lieberman. It's the kiss of death, the friendship of the United States, and when it's personified in a big smacker on the cheeks, it lives to haunt you thereafter.
Do you think the world will be safer after the next American election?
Well, I hope so. I hope it'll even be safer after the midterm elections, which are coming up in November. If I'm right, and Tony Blair will announce the timetable for his departure in September, it may be that Bush is a lame duck president by November, because the Democrats, who in many respects are not much better, but at least are not George Bush and the neocons, are poised to make dramatic gains, I think, in the midterm elections. And in November, it may be that the Congress passes out of the hands of Bush's party and into other hands, And if the march of events continues in the next 2 years, as has been the last 3 to 4 years, then it's very hard to see Bush being succeeded by another neocon Republican president.
Okay.
Which won't solve all our problems, but it will be at least an improvement on what we've had.
Let's go to Jaffa, who's in London as well. Jaffa, you're on the air.
Hello, George. Jaffa Clark,
Yes, hello.
from the Muslim Parliament.
Oh, yes.
Hello, George. My question is, do you think there's a relationship between the British foreign policy on Palestine and the increasing violence amongst British Muslim young people?
Well, it's a very profound question, Jafar, and not only do I think so, I think all the experts who are studying the rise of extremism and fanaticism also think so. And indeed, you only have to listen to these martyrdom videos that these people left before the horrific atrocities that they committed on the 7th of July to see that the radicalization of these young people is profoundly affected by events in the world and their perception of Britain's role in those events. A good friend of mine, Rahul, made this point. I've made it before. He says they always go looking for Muslim clerics or Muslim organizations to find out why these young people, young Muslims, are being radicalized. But in fact, all they need to be radicalized is to switch on the news. If they switch on the television news in the evening, hey presto, they get radicalized. Because what they see is the kind of suffering we've been talking about tonight in Lebanon, in Palestine, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and they get radicalized. So there's no point in pretending otherwise. Our role in the world under Tony Blair has made the world a more dangerous place, but has made Britain a more dangerous place. It's been against our own interests. I'm not saying what I'm saying just because I love the Lebanese or because I love the Palestinians, but because I love us. And I don't want our interests and our safety to be prejudiced by a foreign policy which is essentially somebody else's foreign policy.
Okay. Let's talk to, thank you, Jaffa, for phoning in. Let's talk to Tarek, who's in Cheshire now. Tarek, you're on the air through to George Galloway.
Hi, good evening, George.
Hi, Tarek.
I just would like to commend any decent, honest, free human being would just see the Zionist government in Israel as a terrorist establishment. They bomb innocent civilians, women and children. They bomb Red Cross ambulances, and they also bomb United Nations soldiers. And I'm just very, very concerned of the impotence of United Nations on even not allowing the Secretary General, Kofi Annan, to condemn Israel and to produce a decision to condemn Israel after bombing United Nations soldiers. This is just crazy. It's not United Nations anymore.
They were so impotent, Tarek, that they couldn't even agree to hold an investigation into the killing of their own soldiers. They have no power whatsoever, and the United States does with the United Nations what it will. And when the United Nations will not bow the knee to their policy, they simply step outside the United Nations and do what they wanted to do anyway. That's exactly what happened in Iraq. Britain and America tried to get the United Nations to back the war. When the United Nations refused, they stepped outside the door and launched the war anyway. And until we have a United Nations worthy of the name, where the Security Council is elected, where you don't get a veto on decisions because you've got a nuclear bomb, while you're trying to stop anybody else getting a nuclear bomb, then the United Nations will be virtually worthless. And sending these United Nations troops to Lebanon, as I said earlier, will merely freeze all the existing problems and will solve none of them. Indeed, will act as a cover for a year or 2 years or 3, where we try to forget about the problem. But sooner or later it will erupt again, and it will erupt again with greater violence, and in the interim, in the 3 years or however long it takes for them to erupt, we'll have radicalized still more of generation after generation of Muslim people who care about what's happening to their co-religionists in Palestine and Lebanon.
Okay, Tarek, thank you for your call. Thank you to everybody for their calls. George, believe it or not, we've come to the end of the programme.
It's amazing, James. 2 hours has passed in a flash, and it's nearly midnight here.
I know. Well, I decided to go to a nice little Lebanese restaurant I know now and think about you over there in Beirut.
Well, Lebanese food is amongst the best food in the entire world. Syrian food, actually, believe it or not, is even better. But do that, James, but don't make it too expensive, as I've offered to buy the meal. So go to one of these cafes on the Edgware Road rather than Knightsbridge, if you don't mind. But you and Mrs. Will, I'm really very grateful. I don't know, James, if you're holding the fort tomorrow or it's one of our other colleagues, but we'll be back tomorrow night.
Yep.
By which time I'll have spent the whole day down on the battlefield in the south of Lebanon with more eyewitness accounts. And I hope everyone who is listening tonight will listen in again. Those that didn't get through tonight, hope that they get through tomorrow. And it should be another mother of all talk shows tomorrow night on Talk Sport and Talk 107.
See you soon, George. Bye-bye.
Thanks, James. Bye now.